Welcome, everybody, to the show. It is, if I'm counting right, it's 109 years ago today that the second meeting between Sam Langford and Jeff Clarke occurred. We're going to look at that fight. Unlike previous, shows, I'm not going to go into the entire rivalry in this show because I plan to do videos specifically on the rivalries Langford had with people. And we also have an anniversary, I think in December, of another Sam Langford, Jeff Clarke fight. So maybe we'll dig a little deeper then. I had the issue of deciding whether to postpone the show or like fully flesh out the rivalry between the two of them because there's sort of different ways that people have reported and interpreted the reports. So we'll get into that in December's show. What we're going to look at though, Jeff Clarke, great fighter, probably should be in the Hall of Fame. He's He's fighting Langford 6 days after Langford got a revenge win over Ed Gumbo Smith. Big up, Joe. Oh, nice. Well, hopefully this will take the edge off of work. I know I listen to a lot of boxing stuff at night when I'm at work, so hope you're having a good time there, sir. As best as you can at work, of course. So Jeff Clarke, he started fighting. Let me pull up his early career. I'm going to get right into it. I'm trying to be a little more concise, especially considering the amount of time it takes to prep for these. Jeff Clarke, as far as I know, he started in 1908. Oh, what's up, Joseph? Yeah, Joseph, we're doing Sam. I'm doing, with only one exception, we've done an anniversary, every anniversary of his fights since August, I think, 28th. No, I'm sorry, September 28th. But I did miss one a few days ago. Jack Thompson, I believe, and I'm going to make that up and I'll put it in the playlist. I'm going to assemble the playlist. I think I'm going to redo the playlist, though, go oldest to newest. So as people listen, they'll hear about the upcoming shows and then they'll be automatically playing at the moment. So the thumbnail stayed current. I've got it flipped where the newest stuff starts. But it's going to be a bit weird going back through it. So I'll figure it out. I'm still figuring out exactly how to do the show. And fortunately or unfortunately for me, I got at least another 295 fights or more to go. Not that many shows, but as far as anniversaries. Joe, I feel you, brother. I'm in my 40s, and it wasn't until my 40s I even found out really who Sam Langford was, other than I guess I mentioned that. Oh shoot, what's the name? Kellerman. He mentioned it in the lead up to the right as they were doing the walkouts for Kelzagi Kessler in Wales, in front 50,000 people in Wales. He mentioned Langford and Greb as all-time great, sort of 168-pound, roughly in their prime fighters. It's the only time I'd heard of him. So yeah, we're trying to dig deep here on Mr. Langford's career, and I'm learning a lot. This is helping me sort of also, figure out how to discuss this and like sum up all this information. So I get a benefit beyond just providing entertainment. I hope you guys enjoy this stuff. So let's see. So in '08, you can see early in his career, other than a 3-round loss to Jack Reed, no decision loss in Philly. At this time in Philadelphia, no official decisions, fights. So I guess 3 is permissible, 4 or 6 rounds. Most of the fights you'll see in Philly are 6 rounds. And and Clarke is no exception. Starts off fighting in Philly. Later on, he's going to fight a great deal out of Joplin, Missouri. He's going to fight around Joplin, Kansas area. He'll make trips to Mexico. I mean, his career goes on and on. He has, I think, shout out to the boxing librarian. I believe in the boxing librarian's stats, he has the 7th most fights against Hall of Famers in BL's entire database, which is pretty crazy. Oh, it's okay. Good question, Joseph. Do I ever find actual pics of the great Peter Jackson, the original Peter Jackson? I haven't really looked. I know he's there in the papers, in the archives. I just haven't because I know he was very great, and I will just fall into that rabbit hole and never come out. I'm very wary. I paused. I sort of derailed myself to do a countdown, a Greb's season countdown with boxing librarian and scrapbook boxing, and just typing out Greb's almost 300 fight career was a major derail. I've tried to be a little more focused, so I'm tempted. I'm tempted to do Fitz, the original Peter Jackson, a whole ton of guys, but I only have so much time at the moment, and so I'm sort of restraining myself. I'm using unusual restraint for me. Goldman Rim magazine. Oh, I see. So you saw something in Ring about Langford. I know there's some articles over the decades that came out about him. I've seen them as I searched for Langford. Some good information in there. Some of it's inaccurate relative to like the original reporting, but I always love reading about Langford. It's actually funny the different publications over decades, how many total fights they said or guesstimated he had. Oh, what's up, Andre? Thanks for joining, brother. I'm glad that this morning time, this 7:30 here, almost 7:30 here in the Northeast US. I'm glad this is a good time where a couple of you guys can catch it live. I love the feedback. These particular shows, I'm definitely going to be like looking at the comments, responding. There are other shows I do, like head-to-head matchup shows, and think where I got to keep my focus and I can't stop. So, stop to. This is not that kind of thing, man. This is a long series. We're here to talk about Langford, and in this case, we're here to also bring up the Joplin Ghost, Jeff Clarke. Now, let me get something out the way. I've seen Clarke. If you look online, you see his last name spelled Clarke and alternately Clarke. I go with Clarke with the E on the end because I just like the aesthetic, but it's also the picture down the text there is actually from a graphic from Joplin, Missouri for a fight of Jeff Clarke. So he was definitely billed as Clarke with the E on the end. That's good enough for me. But you can spell it either way. And if you want to learn more about him, there's not a lot about Jeff Clarke on the internet. There's only a handful of pictures, maybe 4 or 5 photos of the guy that I'm aware of, at least on the public part of the internet. Not sure about certain books. I don't have a large book collection, but search for it with and without the E if you want to catch his total thing. That's right, Andre. Let me throw you up on. He did have a tremendous record. It's just that, you know, when you're fighting, when you're mixing in mad fights against Hall of Famers into your record, and this is true of fighters from later decades, it's hard to keep even a winning record against fellow Hall of Famers, or in Clarke's case, against Hall of Famers. He's not in there. He should be. The strength of schedule has so much to do with people's results. And as we can see here, let me pull back up his 1908. This guy's getting in some fights, right? He does. Dixie Kid, Aaron Brown gets the best of him 3 times in those first 2 seasons, and so does Jack Reed over 3 rounds. Everything else, other than no contest with Stevenson there, everything else is a win. Oh, what's up, Joe? You said you're in Scranton, PA. Now, where in the state is Scranton? I lived in Western PA for a while, but I've only visited the eastern part of the state. Western PA is beautiful, but it's mad country, dude. And the middle of PA, as you know, Pennsylvania, there's I don't want to be dismissive, but it feels like when you're driving it, it feels like there's nothing in between Philly and Pittsburgh. That's overgeneralization, but at least when you're driving on I believe the southern part of the state across on the interstate, there's nothing there but mountains you could fall off of. I guess the Appalachian Trail. But anyway, let me get back to this. Let me not distract myself trying to remember Pennsylvania. But yeah, he's fighting around Philly, so 6 round bouts. This is why if you look at him on BoxRec, certain fighters, the difference between their official record at the top of the BoxRec page and how many bouts they actually had, which is further down, on top of their individual bout listing. The guys that fought a lot in Philly around this time, these guys are some of the worst victims of the no decision curse, where the fact that they had these fights doesn't count, even though they count those fights. If there's a stoppage in a no decision state, they count it. But then at the official record up top, with no official decision, so a lot of people ignore that experience. But as we can see here, experience counts for a lot. Yeah, absolutely, Andre Clarke. In this rich era, he fought a huge amount of fights against some of the most dangerous people in the whole sport. He wasn't particularly big, in his career between like 165 and then almost 200, maybe 195. So today he would have gone from like probably making middle or super middle to cruiser. But oh, you're in the northeast part of the state. Oh, I see. So it's over there in in the eastern part. Yeah, I haven't spent much time there, but up here in Boston, I don't know if it's an old city. Like Philly is an old city like Boston, so maybe it has a similar flavor. But I haven't really my time in the outside of the major cities in Pennsylvania is just traveling, passing through. So '08 and '09, he's had mostly success over those 6 round fights. But let's take a look at what happens. And actually, I'll pull up Sam Langford's 1909 just so we can see where Langford was at. Here's Langford's 1909. He goes undefeated. He wins the British Heavyweight Championship against William Iron Hague. That's in May. And the month earlier, in April, Hague knocked out Gunnamoir, who had avoided a Sam Langford contest. Langford was there in 1907. He knocked out Tiger Smith, which they billed for British middleweight honors. Uh, Gunnamoir declined to take the Langford fight that the National Sporting Club wanted to put together. He wanted to wait for Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, another great fighter at that time, and a huge star, but not a heavy hitter like Langford. Langford was pretty scary. So 2 years later, Langford goes back, and William Iron Hague is the heavyweight champion. He was supposed to fight Jack Johnson this night, May 24th, in front of the club. The contract was signed. Johnson unifies the heavyweight championships, goes back to America. So by this point, it's clear he's not. The club wants to actually strip Johnson, like not recognize, consider him in forfeit. But anyway, long story short, Langford, a right straight in the 4th round, puts Hague out flat out, and also, at this time, when it was clear Johnson was aiming for the Jim Jeffries fight and also fighting White Hopes, easier money. At this time, at least, that was easier money for him, and so people are fighting for the colored heavyweight championship. So that's in play again. So Jack Johnson technically was undisputed for like 5 months. Once it became clear he wasn't going to fight Langford, well, that changed things, and that colored title that he'd held since 1903 was up for play. So Jack Johnson, arguably the first truly undisputed heavyweight champion, lasted about 5 months, 6 months. Congratulations to him, but like if we're looking technically, that was the only time I can think of where at least the gloved era. I mean, it's like if you have a white champion, a colored champion, they're not unifying. You got two champs. Jack Johnson actually turned the trick, one of the greatest ever. But he wouldn't fight line. Once he had that, he was about some money. So Sam Langford takes the British heavyweight title. He also stops Dixie Kid in '09. Body shots, vicious body shots. And then early in 1910, Langford also stops Dixie Kid. He just melts those insides. Langford's long arms, he could clinch one arm and hit you in the kidneys or the ribs with the other one quite easily because he could reach around that elbow and he was one of the great inside fighters of all time, one of the great pressure fighters, but also one of the great ring cutters and inside fighters ever. One of the hardest hitters. A long list of heavyweights said that Langford was by far the hardest hitter they ever fought. And that includes guys who fought some guys who had some real stuff in their fists. And then I see a couple comments. I'll go to those. But at the end of 1909, this didn't help this fight against Mike Schreck. We did a show already on this anniversary that happened November 23rd, 1909. And he destroys Mike Schreck. Schreck had actually had a pretty good career. Came in a little bit out of shape for this one, but he got completely mowed down. And Langford was already being avoided, but this, he beat the British heavyweight champ. He smashed Dixie Kid, who was good, very good fighter. Destroys Mike Schreck. Now Langford's really going to have trouble getting fights against a lot of different fighters, and which might explain why in February when he's fighting in 010, when he's fighting in 1910 when he fights Jim Flynn, the first fight, he doesn't get as much money as Flynn. I don't think. I know in the first fight he got the smaller purse in '08 and he destroyed Flynn. He was angry about it. This one I'm not sure, but he carries Flynn, according to a lot of writers at the time. And the betting in the fight they had again in March 17th, scheduled for 45 in Vernon, California for a larger purse. Pretty good gate, even split on the gate, I believe. We have video of that. He goes to last till the 8th, but he really puts it on him at this time. Langford's just destroying people, but sometimes he was known to take it a little bit easier on guys trying to get the big fight. Later that year in April, he fights the great Stanley Catchell, the middleweight champ, over 6 rounds. aiming for a big, 45 rounder or 25 or 45 rounder on the West Coast to follow for a big purse for the championship on the line. Ketchell's murdered, and the claimants, people don't want to go with Langford because he can make middleweight, but he's fighting heavyweights, including the British champion who he destroyed. But and after that, he fights 6 rounds against Battling Jim, and then he stops out Kubiak, the Michigan giant, in 2. So further reinforcing the middleweights just weren't interested. Now, toward the end of 1910, he fights Jeff Clarke, and they insist. Langford's people. Actually, I'm going to go to the comments before I talk about the first meeting. Okay, Joe says, I'm amazed how they fought all over the world. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these guys travel, and we see it in both of their careers, to get fights when you're avoided. But if you're fighting in a rich era and you're being avoided, how do you get fights? How did Langford build probably the greatest CV in boxing history? Him and that Harry Greb. It's close depending on how you measure success versus adversity. But how do you build that when you're avoided? And Greb was avoided too. It's where you go to them. You be willing to take difficult circumstances. Now, Langford, sometimes his people would actually get him favorable circumstances. We're going to talk about the first Jeff Clarke fight where they wanted a smaller ring. They wanted a 16-foot ring to fight Clarke, and Langford took advantage of that size. So it wasn't like it was always tilted against him, but this whole thing about people making weight and rehydration clause and stuff, it does go back. And depending on the circumstances, you can find it throughout history. Nothing new there. Some people are just more apt to take advantage of those things. Because Langford and Jeff Clarke didn't always fight in a small ring. They had quite a rivalry, a lot of fights. Andre says, yeah, Langford fights between March and September 1909. It's like, dude, so many seasons he had was just crazy. Good question, Joseph. I can't speak on that. BL or scrapbook boxing or even 86 boxing, some of these guys would be much more. I don't have any opinion on that, but I will sort of take a look around and see if, watch some fights and closely and see if I can infer anything. I'll bring it up on a later show. Thanks for the question. Andre says 1909 was a great year for Ad Walgast. It's fine to be off topic, brother. These are kind of rambling anyway, man. I just love talking about this stuff. And however long I made this show, it wouldn't be as long as I spent studying Clarke's early careers and typing it up and formatting it. So, maybe we'll have to look at maybe I should do a pound for pound show for each year. And but I'll take a look at Walgast. I know he's come up in BL's videos, and appreciate the heads up. So as we can see, the only loss for Langford in these, and he'd been undefeated in the 1907 and 1908 seasons. So Langford, he'd had 3 undefeated seasons, and then he comes in 1910 and in officially a no decision. The next fight after, roughly a month after his second brutalization of Dixie Kid, who will remember had beat Jeff Clarke. He, quote unquote, Flynn gets the best. Now, technically on newspapers, from what I saw, it was actually one newspaper either way, and the ref had said after the fight, if there was a decision, he would have given it to Flynn, and that's what we're counting. So it's a very close fight. But anyway, he gets that one back with brutality. There's video highlights of that have survived, which is amazing. And it's the only fight you can really see Langford able to fight a come forward battler, because the other 2 fights survived. Joe Jeanette knew that was their 10th fight, and he knew him very well. So there's a lot of jabs, a lot of movement, trying to avoid that inside fighting where Langford was so dangerous. But the other fight, Bill Lang was doing more of a Jack O'Brien style circling and then planting and throwing, but trying to jab and trying to circle. And Langford, we just see him cutting him off and just beating his ass all over the ring. But in the fight with Flynn, we actually see Langford responding to someone who, the type of fighter that he loved, which is someone who's come forward, trying to clinch, trying to fight on the inside, close the gap, because Langford had, with those long arms, he could post off and then throw massive uppercuts, hooks to the body. He was also expert sort of trapping the hands. You can see him at one point in the Bill Lang fight from 1911, even though there's not supposed to be clinching, you can see him sort of just trap Lang's right hand. He like feints with a jab, then he throws the jab with conviction. Then when Lang closes the gap, he throws a left to the body, and then traps Lang's right hand and then throws a left up top, over the top, landing to the body and the head, clubbing him. He was just so good. So Flynn, we see him post off and throw these gigantic uppercuts and then swing his whole body for the left hook slash forearm to the body, going into the clinch. It's just wonderful to see. And you can see him punching with his entire body, which helps explain why he had so much power. I mean, he punched just like Rocky, but he had more, at his best, he had more coordination and finesse and experience than Rocky. But he had that kind of power and he had that kind of commitment to his shots when he felt like it. Because he was really expert with feints, and he also had a very good lead hand. So in the little footage we have, we only have him against 3 stylists out of all the myriad guys he fought, but it's very instructive in its own way. So anyway, so we can see, I guess I should mention also the fight with Catchell in April. This was actually booked the year before for New York. It got tanked. They were going to charge him with violation, so they didn't have the fight. But then in 1910, it goes on. I think it was 7 papers to Langford, 4 newspapers to Catchell, 3 drawn. And again, people were wondering if Langford was not trying his best. Some people have commented on that, although it was a good fight, good, hard 6 rounds. But some people thought Langford had more. So we didn't get to see, as a sport, people didn't get the rematch, but that's whatever it is. There's plenty of that. So I'm going to move back to Jeff Clarke's. Pull up Jeff's graphic. So we saw his 1908, 1909, pretty good. 1910, this guy has a ridiculous level of activity in 1910. 2 setbacks only. You see it early in the year, beats Dave Holly. That's a little bit older. Dave Holly had been fighting since January 1900 and had a huge amount of fights over his first 4 or 5 seasons. So this is older Dave Holly after he'd actually had a head injury in 1905, I believe it is. But he kept fighting, so he stops Dave Holly in 3 in Philadelphia. Battling Jim Johnson, gets the best newspaper decision. Draws with Larry Temple twice. I think he also beats Temple in the lead up to Langford fight. But anyway, his major opponents of that year, we could say, was Sam Langford, Joe Jeanette. In the Langford fight, we'll actually be discussing this in November and also talking about the entire rivalry in November. But that's the one where they limit the ring size, and Langford just mows him down, knocks him down 3 times in the first. I believe a big left hook in the second, finishes the fight. That's it. He knew that, and you can see with all his experience, it's obvious the guy was a great mover. He could stop people, Clarke, but he was so good with his movement. And in this rematch that we're talking about the anniversary of, which is 4 years later, Clarke is able to stay away and gets it done. I think he's in a little bit of trouble in one of the rounds, but he's basically just too hard to catch and gets the best newspaper decision over 10 rounds. That's the fight we're actually talking about. I'm just talking about the lead up now. 1911, Jeff Clarke is doing it. Unless I screwed something up, he's undefeated that year. Just to mention, before I go to the comments, this is a conglomerate listing. I went a little Cyberboxing Zone and BoxRec. I combined the 2. I don't think I took anything out. I did take out one of the either 3 or 4 fights that Clarke had with Harry West. You can see at the beginning of 1912 there. Between the 2 sites, there are 4 dates, but one of the fights is one of 2 dates. So we ended up with, it's not an important thing other than the fact that he did lose, no decision bout, according to one paper, but just in the interest of disclosure, that's still a little hazy. That was part of my delay. I wasn't sure how to handle it. But some of these dates are approximate. A lot of these are referenced in a book that came out again about the Irish giant Peter Marr, who Clarke did beat early in his career. I didn't even shout that out. What's wrong with me? The Irish giant. Yeah, so in 08 and in 09, he gets the best over 6 rounds. That's actually significant. I should have mentioned that. Go to the comments here. Yeah, 1910 is crazy. Yeah, Andre, Larry Temple was a serious dude. Very tough schedule, very aggressive fighter. I think in some of Scrapbook's videos, he was saying dude was good with the bolo punches and things like that. But I've seen written that he's very, very aggressive. And depending on the style matchup, he could be very, very effective. Here I did a graphic of the fighters that Jeff Clarke had fought one or more times in the lead up to this rematch with Sam Langford. So you see Dixie Kid up there. Well, there's Jeff Clarke on the left, but upper left of the panels there, that's Dixie Kid, and then Peter Marr, then Dave Hawley, Ballingham Johnson in the upper right. The next row down, that's Larry Temple, obviously Sam Langford there, Joe Jeanette, Jim Barry, battling Levinsky, got the best of battling Levinsky very impressively. Great, great resume battling Levinsky has. That dude fought what feels like everybody. And then also Harry Wills. And I think he fought to a draw with Wills. Let me see. Yeah, actually, part of the delay was I had the draw with Wills in green. I had to go back and redo it. That's not even Jeff Clarke. Where's my Jeff Clarke graphic? There it is. June 18, 1913. Yeah, that was green on the first time I did it. So I had to go back into the text file, redo it, re-screenshot it and format, and throw it in this graphic. So that was the extra 15 minutes from the 7:15 start time. I mean, the 7 o'clock to the 7:15 actual start time. Excuse me. So I guess moving through now, while Clarke's doing this in 12, 13, and 14, Langford went to Australia at the end of 1911 to have his second fight with Sam McVeigh, which turns into a 6-fight series just in Australia. But and Langford at the end of 1911 loses his first fight in like 35 fights. I'm sorry, in 21 fights. There was that Jim Flynn fight, and 35 fights before it, stretching back to the end of 1906. So Jim Flynn close, Sam McVeigh again close, but that's the only losing Langford's done. He goes undefeated in 1912. He gets the McVeigh fight back 4 times in a row, 2 of them stoppage, one of them on McVeigh claiming foul, refusing to continue after some body shots. The other one a legit stoppage. The last fight of 1912, he has McVeigh beats him, stops him, kicks his ass by the end. So, but we see Clarke, yeah, he has the loss against Wurst, I guess, or no decision. So the newspaper thought, I can't remember who was reporting that fight, what the paper was. I haven't really been noting in these graphics which newspaper said what, because that would be exponentially more difficult in prep time. And I'm struggling, people, trying to keep up. That's why I don't have the entirety of Jeff Clarke's career here for you. I just have leading up to that fight, or including that fight, the last season of their second fight. But he's fighting some dudes. Fights September, early in September. He fights even with the great Joe Jeanette in Pittsburgh. Very impressive. Because at this time, Jeanette, McVeigh, Langford, these guys, and Clarke himself, mostly kicking everybody's ass that they come and encounter. So fighting even with the great fighters, it does mean something in this time. Now, 1913 is actually the year Langford, by the end of the year, he loses to Joe Jeanette. He's out of shape. He beats some other guys, but people are questioning his stamina. And he also loses to Gumbo Smith. Now, this fight that we're talking about in October 26th, 1914, well, October 20th, 1914, Langford avenges the Gumbo Smith loss. And I'm going to pull up Gumbo Smith here real quick. So let me see. Gumbo Smith. There's his 9, 10, and 11. There we go. You can see how generally successful Gumbo Smith was from 1912 through 1914, especially from the end of May onward. Dan Porky Flynn gets him in a no decision, but gets the best of him. Jack Twin Sullivan fights even with him. Everything else winning until he gets to George Carpentier. He gets DQ'd in that fight. Cyclone Johnny Thompson beats Battling Levinsky, and then he loses to Langford. That's the revenge match for Langford. So Gunboat was hugely successful until now in general, and this severely impacted his chances of a world title shot. And according to one writer, this sort of cleared the way for Jess Willard, who Gunboat had beat in 1913, to sort of challenge for the title. So the fight that happened 6 days before this bout with Jeff Clarke, between Langford and Clarke, was very important in that it sort of crushed. It made it very hard for Gunboat at a time when Johnson's sort of picking and choosing White Hopes to fight. This makes it difficult on Gumbo. He got beat so badly, he got thrashed, and it also explains again why Langford wouldn't always like try to destroy someone. If he could get another booking in another city for money, it doesn't help him if it's not even competitive. And this Gumbo fight was not competitive at all. And if apparently by the end of the second, it was clear like Gumbo was all in, and then by the third, it was vicious time. It was like a vicious beating. Langford, when he had a point to prove, even sometimes after it, post prime, when he had a real point to prove, or someone ticked him off and he forgot about all that, give the fans a show and all this, he would tear into guys. He did it with Kid Norfolk, who had provoked him apparently verbally. But then sometimes those fights aren't bookable again because there wasn't even close. So Langford wasn't the guy to provoke, especially if you wanted some return matches or you wanted clubs to be interested. Anyway, I'm getting off on a derail. I just wanted to highlight Gumbo Smith. Very, very good fighter. Great jab. Good right hand too. Like good cracked real hard. Good jab, good straights. Did get the best of Langford. Some people, because of the results in the second fight, some people thought that the first one wasn't on the level, but Langford claimed he got the best of him fair and square. And also Langford came in a little bit heavy. He was a couple dozen pounds over, like maybe a target weight, or what at that time was till then considered his target weight. So, but he did get the win. Yeah, Gumbo went down hard in the second one. And then Jeff Clarke. So let's pull up Jeff Clarke. You see, he doesn't lose this year. And a fight in 13 with Jeanette. One of them was stopped in the seventh of 8 rounds. This is in Memphis. The ref apparently thought Jeanette was in control, didn't think he was trying to finish Clarke, so he stopped the fight, declared a no contest after 7 rounds. That would happen to some of these fighters. They were held to a very high standard. So in certain jurisdictions with certain refs fighting on points, you might even get stopped if you're ahead and you're not trying to like do the business. This is especially for colored fighters at this time sometimes very harsh. So like even like no decision fights, we can't assume they were going easy because there's no official decision. There's a pretty high standard they're held to. He did fight a lot in Joplin. I don't know. I can't remember the guy's name offhand. I'll bring it up in November when we talk about one of their other anniversaries between Langford and Clarke. I'll bring up his promoter. I read an article on it. I have a photo of him. I just didn't format it. I got pretty time got pretty crunched down, Andre. By the time I was due to start, I didn't want to let you guys down. As far as I feel bad every time I have to delay these. Yeah, so he was from up north. I'm trying to remember. I think Clarke was from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, but he was from up north. But he ended up down in Joplin, and the guy who promoted him, yeah, he fought a lot there. But that's why his early, I guess he moved. Actually, I mean, I should have done better reading on Clarke. It might be that he moved there as a kid, and the end when he came to fight, he went back up north. But early in his career, he was fighting out of Philly largely. Like I said, we'll do more in depth on Clarke going forward. This is not intended to be a long show, although we're already 33 minutes deep. That's how that goes, huh? So you can see here, Clarke's good enough. He's battling even with a young version of Harry Wills, but he's largely successful. I mean, this is quite a hell of a run, and you think about what the body goes through with his schedule and traveling up and down, like fighting down south, but also traveling up to the Midwest, going up to Pittsburgh and all this stuff to do work. So in the first fight, he'd been destroyed, but then he had like some busy seasons. So if we can just put this in perspective, you see he land the end of the 1910 season, he loses to Langford and fellow great Joe Jeanette. 1911, yo, he's killing it. Look at that. 1912, other than one of the fights with Harry Wurst in a no decision, but like in spirit, killing it. 1913, killing it. 1914, killing it. I mean, this is a dead serious guy. And then I think it's in 15, he has his first fight with the great Sam McVeigh. So I did a quick graphic right before I went live. This is Sam McVeigh, 1906, when he sort of started to hit his stride through 19, I'm not sure, 14. And the only red on there, you see, that's Joe Jeanette, Sam Langford, and Harry Wills. all of whom he also beat in that stretch. So Sam McVay is a great fighter, and he will come up in one of the other Jeff Clarke things. I'll prep a graphic with all of his different major rivalries. Jeff Clarke's career is massive. So I think it's under 200 fights, but maybe 190. I can't quite remember. But we can infer it's a lot. I think it's about 190 fights. If I counted right, that 1910, that's 28 fights. That's as many as Langford's 1903, which I always rave about, where he had 28 fights, lost one of 28. You know, Clarke's, at the highest level, Clarke wasn't successful this year, whereas Langford, at the highest level, he was more successful. He beat Gans over 15 rounds in '03, and he drew with Jack Blackburn, but that was because it was a prearranged draw, so he kind of lost in spirit to Blackburn and actually lost to Danny Duane on points in '03. But if you talk about 28 fight schedule, this is pretty awesome. Shout out to Jeff Clarke. And you can see like he's beating lots of guys up. He's fighting great fighters intermittently. Also some badass guys who are trouble, like Larry Temple, tough fighter, but just not in every matchup, but certainly capable. And 11, so he's and at the end he fights. So between the two sites, they have 3 fights against Baden Levinsky. Although one of them Levinsky was fighting as Barney Williams. So it was either 2 or 3. I mean, it's hard adjusting what my graphics to reflect 2 sites that I primarily draw from. But safe to say, tremendous schedule here for Mr. Clarke. So going into 12, like we said, Harry Wurst. But other than that, and then the no contest with Jeanette, which he was definitely getting beat up in. Going into that 14 when he beats Langford, October 26, 1914, he's on quite a run. And, if we count that Wurst fight, basically after the loss to Jeanette, if I've got this correct, other than Wurst, no one's getting the best of him between then and putting a dent in Sam Langford's career, or at least in no decision, but getting the best of Sam Langford. And he's using his mobility. I'm going to see if I can. And Langford was coming off a week-long thing in Indianapolis, doing like daily sparring sessions and taking on, $100 if you can last 4 rounds in Indianapolis with his sparring partners, George Byers and Bob Armstrong. But also taking on all comers, like, hey, if you can stay 4 rounds with Sam Langford, you get you $100. So he was doing that for a week before the first fight. So he was like a well-oiled machine going to the first fight. The second fight, Langford had been facing some questions about his conditioning, but he was having a killer year. But it was 6 days after a fight that he whipped himself into superb shape for an important fight. So maybe just after the travel, after the gunboat win, having 6 days, and he just wasn't in the same shape. But also, he'd run Jeff Clarke over 4 years earlier. Maybe he didn't take him seriously enough. So Clarke gets the best of him in an otherwise undefeated season for Langford. A lot of guys having these badass. You see how many people there are in the mix, though. Lots of guys can have really good seasons all at the same time, even if they lose a fight. So if you go like 11-1, 12-1-3, or whatever different stuff, I think Langford this year was 13-1-3. Yeah, he lost a fight, but dude, it's okay. It's okay to lose a fight if you're putting in the seasons of work. Just like no one expects a basketball or hockey team to go undefeated, or even an NFL team, even though that's a smaller sample size. That's closer to the amount of games some of these guys had fights. Very rare to go completely undefeated. We've seen undefeated seasons. Now, I didn't do a graphic for the overall Clarke rivalry with Langford yet. I'll have that for November's show, but we have talked about some rivalries. It's hard to get a win over Langford in a rivalry. Jim Barry, denied. Battling Jim Johnson, denied, in spite of a gigantic size advantage. Fireman Jim Flynn, mostly denied. Got the best of it in a close one, possibly carried to allow it. But then Lee Anderson, I'm sorry, Jack Taylor, late edition Langford, still denied. But then Lee Anderson was able to use his attributes, and he had a busy schedule himself late in Langford's career. Post cycloptic, half blind Langford, he was able to actually get the best of a series. Oh, what's up, Ross Glenn? Nice to see you, sir. Good morning. I assume, yeah, it's got to be morning for you. Oh, nice to see you, man. Thanks for joining in. Yeah, just sort of getting ready to possibly wind down this this talk. We've got I think there's one more before the month's out. Actually, I think it's another fight with Jeff Clark. Okay, yeah, one of the other fights with Jeff Clark is actually coming up before the end of this month, and that's the last one. Then I got to do the makeup one for I can't remember Jack someone. A fight from either the 21st or 24th, depending on the source. Yeah, so then November 10th is the next time we'll be talking about. No, I'm sorry. There's one on the 31st, and I guess again in November 10th we'll talk about another fight. That first fight. It's crazy some of these rivalries. Oh, that's what's up. Yeah, replay crew. I got to do a lot of stuff that way myself. So yeah, so as we can see already at this point in his career, and he's not even nearly done. Jeff Clark has fought some dudes. He's been in there with some serious people, and it just keeps going on and on. He's different degrees of success, but like with Langford, sometimes in fights he lost, he's not looking terrible. But there's a lot of there's a rhythm to the schedule these guys keep, and sometimes the tougher fights take it out of them for easier fights. They don't have the luxury of like a 3 month camp for all of this. So what we're seeing is guys who are in the middle fighting through injury, more like a like in the extreme, like baseball and basketball players, they have to deal with a certain amount of activity as one of the major factors. Whereas today's boxing is more like, take some weeks off, at the least take weeks off before going into camp again. These guys are back in a fight days later. And it doesn't necessarily excuse the loss because that was the conditions they were fighting under. These guys were busy, but most of them were busy. So Langford, he loses, but yeah, man, he beat. And some of the guys he fought had just fought when he fought them. It wasn't just him fighting all the time. So that's part of the context of these days is guys put in some real work. So look at Langford's 1914, Gumbo's 1914, including fights with Carpentier and Langford. Holy cow. Clarke's 1914, beating Langford. Not really other like heavily significant wins, but going undefeated, over what is that, 8 fights, going undefeated over that many fights, including beating one of the greats. And Langford was not an easy guy to beat at this time, even in fights when he came out of shape. Hold on, let me pull him back up real quick. Yeah, so um, in 13, the wins, like the draw with Colin Bell, people were surprised. They didn't expect Colin Bell to draw them, but I'm pretty sure the wins over Dan Porky Flynn, John Lester Johnson, the loss to Jeanette, and possibly also, and certainly the loss to Gumbo Smith, and possibly the win over Jack Lester. These are all, he was being criticized, even though he didn't lose them all. And some of the guys he stopped brutally, but they were used to seeing Langford look beyond epic. So when he was merely epic or just better than the other guys in certain fights, people would criticize. They were quick to look for the decline because in these days with this kind of schedule, the decline could really happen very quickly. Sometimes, even though there's like on paper, you see a lot of winning after, sometimes guys just aren't quite the same. They leave a lot in there. Jim Barry, after, let me pull up Jim Barry, fought a bunch of dudes. You can see in like 1909, 10, 11, mostly like he does have some stoppage losses. Langford gets him out of there. Arthur Pelkey gets him out of there. But like a lot of this stuff's going decision pretty tough. But after he fights 20 rounds each against Sam Langford and Sam McVeigh in early 1912, you see for the rest of his career, he has a great deal of difficulty winning anything because he just fought 40 rounds against all-time great heavyweights and went the distance. So sometimes the decline could kick in. Sometimes in a way that's evident on paper, sometimes it isn't. But like these guys, which is why someone like Langford, he was also a master boxer. He could take it. He had a great chin, but he had technique. He knew how to let stuff glance off of him. Not everyone who eats punches eats them flush. They're guys as part of their technique. They can take a certain amount if it gets them in range for other things, or if it sets up certain things. Langford was an expert on the inside. in closing the gap. There were times he got hit, but it didn't do anything to him. Other times he could be very evasive and take advantage of it that way. Just depends, it depends on the customer. In Jeff Clarke's case, he wanted to close the gap and put the punishment on Clarke as quickly as possible because Clarke was so excellent at moving around. So early in their series, they go 1-1. Langford stops him very quickly and brutally. I think it was the fourth time in the fight, within those 2 rounds, the fourth time he put him down. That was for the count in the rematch, which I'm not certain. I haven't been able to find out what size ring they fought in the rematch, but it's possible that Clarke was like, hey, this is what it is. I don't know that it was every fight that they demanded. So it might be that the larger ring helped him, or alternately, in spite of, again, the insistence on a smaller ring, he was able to navigate it. But Jeff Clarke's a great fighter. You see his experience. That's the difference. There are guys who win some fights right in the burst, then they don't have a very busy season. So they have all this time to get ready for one performance, but maybe they couldn't sustain what they did earlier in their career, and it's for show. Guys like Clarke putting in those seasons, win or loss, doing all that work. Some of those obviously 6-round fights, but not all of them. And he's stopping a lot of people. And even like in the loss in 1910 to the great Joe Jeanette, like he goes the distance with Jeanette in New Jersey. He doesn't go the distance with Langford. He gets run over, but Langford was a much harder hitter than Jeanette. Jeanette had plenty of stoppages, but he didn't have the crack of Langford. No one did. In fact, let me read you this quote. Because this fight happened 6 days after the Gunboat Smith fight, if I can find my place, I'd like to read y'all a quote from Gunboat Smith. This is quoted in Clay Moyle's book on Sam Langford. Okay, I'll read so this is Clay Moyle's words here. I'll read his paragraph and then the quote. Smith continued to fight till 1921, but many boxing followers believed he was never the same. Smith always felt that he peaked in his first fight with Sam. Asked during an interview sometime in the 1920s who the best heavyweight he ever saw was, Smith, who had faced heavyweights Jess Willard, Frank Moran, Jack Dempsey, Fred Fulton, and Harry Wills, responded, "That's an easy one. Sam Langford, and nobody ever came close to being as good as he was at his peak. Wild Sam could do everything. He could punch from any position and hit hard, too. He was a master boxer, difficult to hit, but if you did land, you might as well just try to make an impression upon the floor of the garden. He would take all the heart out of you and then give you a fine pasting. He ruined me. I was all through after that last fight with Langford in Boston. Other colored heavyweights have cleaned up on Langford's reputation. Langford, you see, could punch with either hand and had a wallop every time he landed, no matter where he started the blow. That's where he was different from those who have tried to follow in his trail." End quote. And, part of what made Joe Louis special was that Langford's contemporary, the great Jack Blackburn, given Louis that old school posture and that balance to add to his natural power. And he was someone else. Rocky Marciano was another one who could deliver knockout killer power from any position at any distance. And it makes a difference. Lots of guys can take a big winging swing. that tight power, having that option, because Langford could throw wide shots as well, but the option to land telling blows makes a big difference. So that's partly what made Joe Louis special, is he was like maybe a throwback or an upgrade of a throwback style, but with the goal of having that short power like Langford, because that was one of the things. So it's very impressive. It speaks a lot to the skill of the Joplin Ghost that he was in their second fight. After 4 years of activity, he was able to, oh, that's Gunboat, my fault. After 4 years of activity, he was able to stay away and get the best of it and avoid the artillery that lots of guys couldn't avoid from Langford. As evidenced by Langford's career, like, I don't have 08 individually. I just didn't have time to upload it. But here's like 09, 1910, 1911. You see the one loss to McVeigh at the end of 1911. But Langford was bullying McVeigh in that fight. He just lost on points because McVeigh was so effective on the back foot, straights and lead lefts, but like check hooks and things. But Langford gets it back. 12, 13 questions about his like stamina. Is he what he once was? Still one of the best, but is he what he once was? But at the end of 1913, he fights a classic with the great Joe Jeanette in Paris, and Langford is in good shape and a fantastic fight, and puts an exclamation point at the end of the 1913 season, in which he was criticized for being overweight. And then in 1914, it looks like he's going to go undefeated, and he just viciously avenges himself against Gumbo. But then Jeff Clarke, a very, very, very important win for Jeff Clarke, is he's able to get the best of the Boston Bone Crusher at a time when, in a season when no one else did. Even though, Harry Wills battling Jim and Joe Jeanette fought even with Langford that year, no one got the best of him except Jeff Clarke. So this is actually a badass fight we're talking about, a badass performance from one of the great jabber movers. And you can see from me bringing up Clarke's career, like if we count strength of schedule as a combination of difficulty of opponent, but also difficulty of schedule. Literally, like how many times can you make your body respond? When George Foreman made his comeback, that was partly what he was doing. He was fighting a bunch of dudes, if I'm not mistaken. He was fighting a bunch of dudes he's supposed to beat, but he's beaten a lot of them. Primo Carnera did that after lost to Sharkey. He had like a ton of fights in the months following, like to get experience and to build a name about. We see in a slow way later generations, guys will have filler fights in between. Even great fighters, like if you look at their fight record, not everyone stands out. Some of those guys are supposed to lose, but it's impressive, especially when compressed into these busy years. So for me, it's more impressive. Like if, if after Clarke lost to Dixie Kid, if he took 3 months off and then fought young Tommy Coleman over 6 rounds and got the best of him, I wouldn't be as impressed. He's doing it 6 days later. He's like loses the fight either over 6 rounds, alternately reported as a stoppage in 3, but he loses Dixie Kid. He's right back in there the next week. Langford did this too. He lost to Danny Duane, his first official loss, 1903, lose to Danny Duane. 2 weeks later, he fights 20 rounds, beats Belfield Walcott, the brother of the welterweight champ Barbados Joe Walcott, over 20 rounds in Scituate, Rhode Island. Another state. 2 weeks later, another fight. Get right back on the horse. So that's why if you freeze frame at some point in someone's career and start counting losses out of context, it's hard to, because it's hard to sort of quantify in just a generic number just what these guys were doing. You can look at that 1910. That's crazy. And I think for the next show, for the November anniversary of the Clarke fight, I'll have Clarke, Jeanette, McVeigh, Langford, all the guys, like in and around that mix, all the prominent guys, all on the same graphic. I'll put all their 1910s, 11s, 12. I'll find a way to, so the eye can take it in all at once. But you guys already know this format. Like my format changes. We've seen that. I'm still figuring out what I'm doing. I'm half lost. I'm just trying not to make overt mistakes. Like I almost threw up. Like in June 1913, there I almost had Wills and Green when I went live on the show. I'm like, that's not good. Just visually, I'm trying to be accurate as best I can, as well as the text. Like I said, he's going to have a fight with Sam McVeigh. He's going to lose to McVeigh, but at least I think, yeah, he loses over on points Kansas City. I think that might have been their first battle, but we can see, losing to great Sam McVeigh. There's no shame in that. That's not. He's going. Oh, thanks, Andre. I appreciate the encouragement, man. I love doing this. I just want to make sure it's accurate because I don't want to get to a point where I'm embarrassed about early shows in the series because I've noticed too many. I've already noticed a few mistakes. I don't want to have a. Oh, thanks, brother. I love doing this series. Let me throw that comment up. You can say stuff like that all day, my friend. I'm learning a lot. It's sort of also forcing me to keep a schedule of study beyond the newspaper research I'm doing from Langford's first 5 or 6 seasons. This is actually forcing me to confront things that I've been, having a preference to earlier fights in his career. But these are very important rivalries. We see Jeff Clarke, some common opponents there. So, Langford fought Dixie Kid, smashed him twice. He didn't fight Peter Mara. Langford had multiple fights with Dave Hawley. Beat him convincingly in one of their fights and knocked one of his teeth out. But like other times, Hawley actually gave him his second career loss. Beat him in the 1904 season, the same year that Langford fought even with the great Barbados Joe Walcott. So Holly had moved up to welterweight the same year Langford moved up from, into '04, and he was one of the top welterweights. Fortunately, Barbados Walcott uh, shot himself in the hand later in the year, and the welterweight title went to crap. And that sucks for a guy like Holly, who wasn't like Langford, who just kept growing and growing and growing. So in '05, Langford's a middleweight and a heavyweight. He just kept fighting up. Not everyone had the frame to actually be able to do that. It's a rare character who can just keep going up and keep their power. Langford's one of the few. Yeah, fought some dudes, big battling Jim Johnson, who probably would have had 20 or 30 pounds on Clarke. But of course, Clarke's very mobile, so fighting him. Larry Temple, very aggressive. Apparently, Clarke able to navigate that, at least fighting even at worst. You know, yeah, he gets run over Langford early in his career. The next time they fight, he gets the best of him. So he's established himself as a dead serious guy, ignoring everything else. Getting a win over Langford at that point, that wasn't some normal stuff. Although some people would, because of what Langford had been, some people would react to a Langford loss as a decline in Langford, but he kept proving people wrong. He was stayed dangerous, to the 1920 season, where, yeah, he lost to Wills in one of the fights to Lee Anderson, but like 1920, he's still keeping a tremendous win-loss percentage. It's incredible. Joe Jeanette, tough. Jim Barry, another aggressive fighter. Hard-hitting, aggressive fighter. One of the few to knock Sam Langford down, to knock down a prime Sam Langford, Jim Barry. Didn't beat him, but he did knock him down in two different fights at least. And, Jeff Clarke, his numerical results against Langford belie how competitive some of those fights were. Jeff Clarke was a beast. It's just, and stopped a lot of people in his career. Did not have an insignificant amount of stoppages, just at the very highest levels. A lot of these guys are going to decision. Even like Langford and McVeigh. So in their first, let me think, 7 fights, all but one goes to decision. They draw in Paris in 1911 at the end of the year. McVeigh wins on points over 20 rounds. The next year, no, I'm sorry, the next year, 2 of the 4 fights don't go to the distance. And then the next fight, their last in the Australian series, goes to a draw as well. So at the highest levels, and Clarke was like that. He's not always getting stopped. Like early on, Langford gets him out of there. Jeanette does not. And that's 10 rounds. And that's Jeanette in New Jersey near his home base. So, if you can go 10 rounds with a 1910 version of the West Hoboken Ironman, you are in good shape. Even if you got run over by Langford. And you can see after those fights, though, he's right back into the win, including battling Levinsky, a very, very good fighter, very underrated fighter these days. Not someone that gets much or any attention, but battling Levinsky's CV is real insanity. He's another guy where you just keep going, how many high-level fights? I guess I should maybe consider typing up the Hall of Fame fights. I should shout out the Boxing Librarian. Go to boxinglibrarian.com because he has a lot of information statistically, and also he's been doing these wonderful, if you look at his channel, Hardline Boxing Talk, most of you guys who listen already know, but just for the uninitiated, he's been doing these wonderful stat books that includes people's Hall of Fame record that are available on his website. So check that out. Or you can follow his feed on his channel, and he posts about when they're done. But Clarke, yeah, 7th most fights, I believe, against Hall of Famers. It was either 7th most fights or 7th most rounds fought. I can't quite remember. Incredibly tough career with mixed results. I think he had 6 wins over Hall of Famers, 7 draws, and a bunch of losses. But he has more Hall of Fame wins than a lot of great fighters. For whatever that's worth. In spite, win some, lose some against great fighters. Win some, lose some is I don't know if that counts. It's not random because like we've seen in Langford's other series, there are guys who fought him tons of time. Like if win some, lose some was a real thing, Jim Barry, who could really punch, would have gotten him in one of those. If win some, lose some was a real thing, battling Jim with between 20 and 50 pounds on the guy, depending on the different fights, would have got something. Instead, fighting even was his great achievement against Langford. Fighting even twice and being someone who knocked him down a couple times, Jim Barry's. So these guys like Jim Flynn, there was some controversy about that fight, but like Jeff Clarke beating him over 10 rounds, I don't care if Langford had a fight 6 days before. When Langford beat the great Joe Gans in 1903, Gans had fought a very competitive 6 rounds against Dave Holly the day before, ridden the train. So like this happened the first time Langford fought Jeff Clarke. He'd been doing exhibitions for a week in Indianapolis, and he goes down south and runs him over. So win some, lose some. Maybe sometimes that happens, but it's yeah, Ross Clarke. BL's stat books are fantastic. So much great stuff on there. So, these long fight series, these are over the course of a career. We just talked about the first two. I'm not going to get into the rest of the series. I want to make sure that I account for all the different reports on that, for all the major websites, and hopefully some direct research if I have time. The next time we talk about a fight between Langford and the Joplin Ghost in November, and then in December we'll have another anniversary. Some of these series, oh my gosh, and November will be a crazy month for this podcast series. The end of September, we start on the 28th. The end of September and through October has been almost a warm up for Langford's career. Some of these months are truly bizarre. October wasn't actually, there were plenty of seasons where Langford didn't fight in October, only had one fight in October. Most of the other months of the year are not like that. Some of the months, and I believe November is one of the months where he almost always fought November. Don't take that as gospel, but like we're gonna get into like there are huge parts of Langford's career we haven't touched. We haven't done an anniversary of any of his fights with Harry Wills yet. So right there, yeah, obviously we've been doing a slow month because there are guys we haven't come up with, even though we've encountered some others, battling Jim. We did a couple of the anniversaries of Jeanette. We did Gunboat, we did Jim Barry. Who else? Who else did we do? We did Jim Flynn. We did one of the Dixie Kid fights. I mean, it goes on and on. We did a lot. Here it is. Here's when I tried to write it up. So it was Jack Carter that I missed. No, that's tomorrow. Jack Carter is tomorrow. Jack Thompson I missed was either on the 21st or 24th, depending on what website you look at. Drawing points, 15 rounds in 1919, post prime Langford. So I'll do that one as a makeup. That's not an important fight to my perception. So, but this one here, even though it was officially a no decision, the fact that somebody got the best of Langford, especially after Langford had one of his best wins, that that smashing of Gunboat, which basically dashed Gunboat's immediate hopes for a title shot, or at least cleared the way for Willard, who Gunboat had beaten. It was very important. People were even criticizing Gunboat, saying like, "What are you thinking, putting your contendership up for risk fight rematching Langford when you already beat him?" But Gunboat got his fight on, and I'm sure he wanted that money. So that was a very important win that Langford was coming off. So this win over him by Mr. Jeff Clarke is similarly very important. This is like a statement win for Jeff Clarke, one of his best performances, to be able to stay away from Langford. And honestly, I don't know if I'll try and find out for the next anniversary the situation with the size of the ring, fight to fight in their series. In the first fight, certainly they said a 16-foot ring if we're going to fight, and Langford used that. But I'm not sure about the rest of the. I suppose it would depend on jurisdiction, but it might also depend on like the relative bargaining position or how much money was being made available. I don't know, but in this fight, Langford was very frustrated, and that's too bad. You got to fight all the styles. So Jeff Clarke, badass dude. I think I'm just about ready to call it because now I'm just like going in circles. So Jeff Clarke's opponents leading up to that fight fought some real guys already, and this is just the beginning of his career. This is just a handful of, well, some tough guys, but this is just a handful of Hall of Famers into the full slog of his career. But he's already like put in just gigantic work. I'll pull it up one more time before we go. Pretty incredible. And even stuff like Peter Maher, who had at this point had already suffered quite a few setbacks, but he was fighting a very tough schedule when he was over traveling around Peter Maher. So getting the best of him does mean something. Powerful fighter, good puncher himself. Lots of stoppages earlier in his career. Losing to Dixie Kid, no shame. No shame whatsoever. Joe, you said Dwight. Unbelievable for size. Dwight. I don't know who you're referring to. Unless you were trying to, you were thinking of Jeff Clarke, and you then Dwight Clarke came into your name, wasn't he? He was a baseball player or something, right? Oh no, no, Dwight Clarke was a freaking tight end in the NFL, I think. I do that though. I get names confused. Unless you mean a different Dwight, just let me know. Let me know. But yeah, so this is the Sam Langford series. So I'll just circle back to Sam Langford's, '08. Just know he was undefeated. '09, British heavyweight champion. Stopping guys, stopping Dixie Kid, uh, massacring Mike Shrek in a way that really cemented all the guys his size to stay the heck away. And Ketchell's people did offer the 6 rounder, but they weren't going to give him they in the lead up to that. They've been drawing the color line prior to the they almost had the booking and got torpedoed. Some people were speculating whether their own people torpedoed it by publicizing it so much like didn't really want it. I don't know. There's a lot of different rumors about that fight, the original booking, and then they do get it on over 6 rounds. They never get the long fight. People Langford size are very wary about just going in to a decision or fighting a long rounds fight against him. So a lot of times he's just giving up size. Not to the Dixie Kid. He was bigger than the Dixie Kid, but gives up size to Fireman Jim Flynn. I'm pretty sure to Nat Dewey. Flynn again. Barry's a little bit bigger than him. Ketchell's a little bit smaller than him. Battling Jim Johnson, much larger. Al Kubiak, much heavier. Al Kaufman, much heavier. And that fight doesn't happen. We're going to get into that in June and the whole controversy about that fight, that ill-fated fight. Jeanette's a little bit bigger than Langford. He's not significantly larger. Clarke, probably comparably sized, a little bit taller, even within that range of reported weights, but a little bit heavier. So like Langford's giving up size and running most of these guys over. He gives up 40 pounds to McVeigh in Paris. He's heavier by the time they fight December, but in Paris he comes in super crunchy, 161. McVeigh's 201. And I think actually he was a little heavier than. Well, that's about the size. That's about the weight he came in February against Bill Lang. One something. I forget exactly. Roughly 160. That was about his size then, but super trained. But he comes in heavier at different times. Depends on the matchup. Depends on the schedule. I'm pretty sure that first fight in 1911 he was a little bit heavier than he came in later against McVeigh. I'll have to double check. Langford just largely, other than the setback against McVeigh, largely just tearing his way across the landscape until he gets to the end of 13. Then goes back on it, starting with that fantastic performance in December in a classic in Paris. Goes right back on the winning, drawing at worst. And even then, that's just Harry Wills. The draw with battling Jim Johnson in September, that was considered a robbery decision, that there was no way Jim should have gotten the draw, but he did. That's my understanding, at least. Unless I'm confusing it with one of their other fights. I'm pretty sure that was the one where. But then the Jeanette fight, but then he sort of answers a lot of questions. He's been successful with questions. Then in October 20th, 1914, he puts on Gumbo. And then right afterwards, there's questions again because Jeff Clarke. So styles make fights. What up, Hafid? Welcome to the chat, sir. So there are always questions. The press are always looking for chinks in the armor. Like this is what they do. Their guys that fight such busy schedules. It's easy for someone to like go past it mid-season, and they're gonna always ask these questions. So when people say you're only as good as your last fight, that wasn't only true. And maybe it was a little less true in this time where you could very quickly prove, oh, that was just an off night because you were so busy. But it was easy to catch criticism even during the time when these guys had so many seasons, especially as certain guys were seen to be a step up in class. It's like Gumbo, Will's later, but like Gumbo, Jeanette, Langford, these guys are like higher class. So fighting them, it's going to count more for or against you. So not looking good in 13 against Jeanette and like gassing after the 6th round and not seeming to be quite what he was, even though it was competitive early in the fight. That's not good. That's the highest level showing. So just because you smashed John Leslie Johnson in the fight before, a month earlier, doesn't make up for losing to Jeanette because you're supposed to smash these other guys if you're still the Sam Langford of old. So yeah, this is the part of Langford's career where there are questions. So Jeff Clarke contributed to that, but he was a great fighter with a great record who was very busy. You could see he's traveling between the different accounts of his schedule. He's traveling up and down the country, going north, going south. So he's not, once he gets down there, hold on a second. Yes, he's traveling around the different states, but he's also shooting up to the north at times for fights. Just wild. Yeah, see, June 10th, Memphis. June 27th, Pittsburgh. July 4th, New Jersey. July 11th, New Jersey. Then Pittsburgh in August. Then Joplin. So Pittsburgh, August either 8th or 9th, fights Kid Cotton. This is 1912 in Pittsburgh. August 15th, he's fighting in Joplin. We saw Langford do this. Fights Gunboat in Boston, beats his ass. 6 days later, he's down in Joplin, Missouri, fighting the Joplin Ghost. So pretty wild stuff. I think I'm gonna call it. I said I was gonna call it like 20 minutes ago. It is fun though, and I hope you guys get some entertainment out of this. Helps you pass the time, and it's just that you're having a great day. That's more important than anything. But yeah, the Joplin Ghost is able to take, avoiding the damage of Langford, very tough. Even Joe Jeanette couldn't avoid, a great jabber himself, couldn't avoid the damage to Langford. He could just take it better than most of the other guys who would, if they had got eaten shots that Jeanette sometimes ate, they wouldn't have lasted. Jeanette was special that way. Iron Haig there. Although it seems like it was actually a right straight on the point of the chin that Langford eventually got Haig out with, but there's a great photo of him landing a left hook there. You can see Haig's head's like, looks like it's his neck's on one shoulder. Like he's built out of one shoulder. He looks like a weird sort of Transformers type figure. He's getting hit so hard with that left. But Langford, long arms for his height, average arms for like the size guys he's fighting, but long arms for his height. So he was set low. There's a cartoon of him and one of his fights with Big Bill Tate. This was later in his career, but yeah, it was well known. Langford had like an unusual build. Some people thought that was unfair, but he was also a master boxer, tough as nails. He had this is the whole package. That's what a lot of people's testimony about Langford was. When he was at his best, he had everything except being really heavy, but he had everything else. A feed says, I tried putting together a month by month ranking using simple results method from the Ring magazine rankings. Nice, man. I hope I love to see that. If you have a channel or anything, like either tag me in a post or post, let me know somehow. I'll have to check afterwards. But yeah, let me know if you got some stuff coming. If you're gonna put any content, I'd be interested to see. Thanks, Andre. Ross Scott, yeah, man. I'm glad I made it live longer myself. Because I do enjoy talking about this, and I won't tell you guys how long it took to prep for this, just for this partial series show. And I didn't even get into the later series between Clarke and Langford, but just this was significant. But certainly, Clarke getting a win so soon after Langford put the absolute smackdown, and not completely, but to some, had dashed Gunboat's white hopage because he got so destroyed. Like I've said in other shows, there were a lot of guys who couldn't get through Langford, Jeanette, and McVeigh, let alone get to Johnson, to get to Johnson when Johnson was the heavyweight champion, which partly explains why certain guys like Al Kaufman did not want to fight. He was drawing the color line, Stanley Catchall, until he fought Johnson. These guys, to get their opportunity, they didn't want to look bad. Jim Flynn had actually had the newspaper decision win over Langford in 1910. So when he got his shot, even though Langford got it back, he had snapped Langford's streak. So he was one of the few who got opportunity while trying to go through the murderer's row here. Thanks, Afid. Yeah, we definitely go with a niche approach here. I got my little narrow areas like Sam Langford's career, mixed martial arts, a slice of mixed martial arts, mostly the Bellator promotion, and then music. The rest of music is really my focus of my life. I just don't do as much online as off with music. I don't really make that a focus of my internet presence. That's more of a personal, when I'm not performing, that's more of a personal thing. And this is only like a half performance. So this content, I like to keep it mostly boxing. Although I have put some shorts on my channel of some little guitar riffs and things like that, little segments from shows. I'll look to put more of that, but right now, keeping up with this particular podcast series that I've embarked on is my main goal. Unfortunately, this is like a slow part, so like I have just one more before the end of the month, and then I have a makeup one of a less important fight. So just two more before the end of the month, and then November will be coming in swinging. And maybe I'll do an update video between now and the start of next month on everything we'll be seeing that month. Set up a schedule. But Jeff Clarke, at some point, I'd like to do a video just on his career, like separate from the Langford rivalry, just on his overall career and really focus on him. This one, I always relay it back to Langford, other opponents, common opponents, whatnot, because the focus is Langford's career, even though Jeff Clarke beat him on this occasion. So, folks, thanks for joining. Langford, a whole lot of winning. Jeff Clarke, one of the few. You know, McVeigh, Jeanette, Gumboat, Jeff Clarke, Fireman Jim Flynn, if you count that, that's it. That's the list from 06 to the end of 1914. It's the only guys who didn't either draw or lose to him. So pretty intense stuff. Shout out to Jeff Clarke. Shout out to Scrapbook Boxing. Shout out to 86 Boxing. And shout out to the Boxing Librarian. BoxingLibrarian.com, his channel, Hardline Boxing Talk. If you love stats, oh man, go get those stats. I'm still figuring out how to represent that. He's got a more distilled version, like where he's figured out how to represent those different things. I'm still getting there. This is a very time-consuming way to do it, although I like seeing those bursts of green on successful seasons. So maybe I'll stay with this. We'll see. Salute, Russ Clarke. Yeah, thanks everyone, guys, for coming through. Thanks for the comments. Thanks also to people who listen to any part of this, whether or not you commented. It's your thing, folks. Like and subscribe, but I don't really care. I mean, do what you want. Just have a fantastic day. That's the main thing I care about that. Care about y'all having a good day. You know, be grateful for all we have. And we'll catch you on the next show. You know, we'll be talking about another Jeff Clarke fight. So take it easy, y'all.